The summer of 2018 was unseasonably warm off the coast of Maine, the kind of summer that made the ocean glint like polished glass under a relentless sun. For the Callahan siblings, Ethan, 28, and Lily, 24, the annual fishing trip was more than tradition. It was a tether to their childhood, to the days when their father would haul them out to sea in his creaky old boat, the Salty Dawn, teaching them how to bait a hook and read the waves. Ethan, broad-shouldered and quiet, had inherited their father's love for the ocean's solitude, while Lily, sharp-witted and restless, came for the thrill of the chase, the moment when a fish tugged the line and the world narrowed to just her and the sea. That July, they set out from Bar Harbor, their boat loaded with supplies for a week-long trip, their laughter echoing across the dock as they waved to the harbor master, promising to return with stories of the biggest catch yet. The Salty Dawn was a sturdy vessel, a 32-foot fiberglass fishing boat their father had maintained with obsessive care, equipped with a satellite phone, a GPS tracker, and enough fuel to roam the Gulf of Maine for days. They planned to head northeast, toward the rich fishing grounds near the Grand Banks, a route they'd taken countless times before. The weather forecast was clear, the seas calm, and the siblings were seasoned enough to handle the boat's quirks. Yet, as the harbor master watched their boat shrink into the horizon, a strange unease settled in his chest, a premonition he couldn't shake. By the third day, when no check-in call came through the satellite phone, the harbor master alerted the Coast Guard. The Callahan siblings were meticulous about their daily updates, a habit drilled into them by their father, who'd seen too many storms turn deadly to take chances. The Coast Guard launched a search, scouring the Gulf of Maine with helicopters and patrol boats, their radar sweeping for the Salty Dawn's transponder signal. Fishermen in the area reported nothing unusual. No distress calls, no debris, no sign of the boat. Ethan and Lily's mother, Margaret, waited at the dock each day, her eyes fixed on the horizon, clutching a photo of her children from their last Christmas together. Weeks turned to months, and the search was scaled back, then quietly abandoned. The official report listed the Salty Dawn as lost, likely sunk in an undetected storm or struck by a rogue wave, though no evidence supported either theory. The satellite phone's last ping, recorded 2 days after their departure, placed them 200 miles offshore, far from their planned route. Margaret refused to accept the loss, hiring private investigators to comb through maritime records, weather data, and even local legends of ghost ships. Conspiracy theories bloomed online. Some claimed the siblings had been abducted by pirates, others whispered of government experiments in the Atlantic. But the ocean kept its secrets, and the Callahans' disappearance became another unsolved mystery, a footnote in the annals of maritime tragedies. Margaret's life became a shrine to her missing children. She kept their rooms untouched, Ethan's fishing gear still neatly stacked in the garage, Lily's sketchbooks open on her desk, her drawings of the sea half-finished. The small coastal town of Bar Harbor rallied around her, organizing candlelight vigils and fundraisers, but grief has a way of eroding even the strongest community spirit. By 2025, 7 years had passed, and the town had moved on, though Margaret never did. She spent her days scanning maritime forums, chasing leads that led nowhere, her hope fraying but never breaking. Ethan and Lily had been her anchor, their laughter the soundtrack of her life, and without them, she felt adrift in a world that no longer made sense. She'd replayed their last conversation 1,000 times, Ethan's calm reassurance that they'd be fine, Lily's teasing about catching a fish bigger than his ego. The satellite phone, their lifeline, had been silent since that final ping in 2018, its battery long dead, its signal lost to the void. Margaret had all but given up on miracles, her faith worn thin by years of unanswered prayers. Then, on a gray morning in August 2025, everything changed. Margaret was at the local coffee shop, scrolling through her phone, when an email from a maritime tracking service pinged her inbox. The subject line read, "Signal detected, the Salty Dawn." Her hands trembled as she opened it, the words blurring through her tears. The satellite transponder, dormant for 7 years, had sent a faint signal at 3:17 a.m., originating from a point in the North Atlantic, 800 miles east of Newfoundland, a desolate stretch of ocean where no fishing boat had any business being. The signal was weak, intermittent, but unmistakable, a ghost from the past, calling out from the middle of nowhere. Margaret's heart raced as she called the Coast Guard, her voice shaking with a mix of hope and dread. Within hours, a search plane was dispatched, its crew skeptical but duty-bound to investigate. The coordinates were far from any shipping lane, in waters so deep they swallowed sound and light. Margaret drove to the harbor, the same dock where she'd last seen her children, and waited, her eyes fixed on the sky. The town buzzed with rumors. Some said it was a glitch, others that the ocean was finally giving up its dead. The Coast Guard's initial sweep found nothing, no boat, no debris, just endless waves under a leaden sky. But the signal persisted, pinging every few hours, each one a faint pulse from the void. Margaret clung to it like a lifeline, refusing to believe it was a mistake. She contacted a private salvage company, spending her savings to fund a mission to the coordinates. The team, led by a grizzled captain named Hargrove, warned her that the odds were slim. The North Atlantic was a graveyard of ships, its currents unpredictable, its depths unforgiving. Yet Hargrove saw the desperation in Margaret's eyes and agreed to take the job.
His crew set out on a
research vessel equipped with sonar and underwater drones, prepared for a long shot. As they approached the coordinates, the ocean seemed to change, the air growing heavy, the water unnaturally still. The first sonar scans revealed nothing but the usual contours of the seabed, a barren landscape of ridges and trenches. Then, on the third day, a technician noticed an anomaly, a faint outline, too regular to be natural, resting at a depth of 2,000 feet. It was too early to call it a boat, let alone the Salty Dawn, but the shape matched the dimensions of a 32-foot fishing vessel. Margaret, monitoring the mission from shore, felt her heart stutter. Was it possible her children were out there, somehow alive after 7 years? Or was the ocean playing a cruel trick, dangling hope only to snatch it away? Hargrove's team deployed a drone, its camera cutting through the inky darkness of the deep. The footage was grainy, distorted by pressure and distance, but as the drone descended, a shape emerged. A boat, upright on the seabed, its hull encrusted with barnacles, but intact. The name, Salty Dawn, was still legible on the stern, a ghostly reminder of the life it once carried. The crew watched in silence, their skepticism giving way to unease. A boat sunk at that depth should have been shattered by pressure, its pieces scattered by currents. Yet here it was, preserved like a relic in a museum. The drone circled, its lights catching glints of metal, a fishing rod, a hatch, a life preserver still tethered to the deck. There was no sign of human remains, no trace of Ethan or Lily, but the boat's condition raised more questions than answers. How had it survived intact? Why was the transponder suddenly active after years of silence? Margaret, watching the live feed from Bar Harbor, wept as the image of the Salty Dawn filled the screen. It was her children's boat, undeniable proof they'd been here, but it offered no closure, only a deeper mystery. The salvage team planned to send divers to investigate, but the ocean was restless, currents shifting unpredictably around the site. Hargrove warned Margaret that retrieving the boat would be dangerous, perhaps impossible, but she begged him to try. She needed answers, needed to know what had happened to her children, why their boat was calling out to her now, after 7 long years. The ocean had always been a place of secrets, its depths a vault for stories no one would ever hear, but for Margaret Callahan, the discovery of the Salty Dawn was a crack in that vault, a sliver of light in a darkness that had consumed her for 7 years. As Captain Hargrove's salvage team prepared to send divers to the wreck, Margaret sat in her small apartment in Bar Harbor, the walls lined with maps and notes from her endless search for Ethan and Lily. The live feed from the salvage vessel flickered on her laptop, the grainy image of the boat, her children's boat, burned into her mind. It was August 25th, 2025, and the air in Maine carried the first chill of approaching autumn, a reminder that time marched on even when her world had stopped. Hargrove had warned her that the dive was risky. The site, 800 miles east of Newfoundland, was plagued by erratic currents and sudden pressure shifts that could trap divers or damage equipment. Yet the transponder's persistent pings, faint but steady, drove the mission forward. Margaret clung to the hope that the boat held clues, maybe a logbook, a note, anything to explain why Ethan and Lily had veered so far off course, why their boat lay pristine at 2,000 feet when it should have been crushed. The town, rekindled by the news, buzzed with speculation, some whispering of supernatural forces, others of government cover-ups. Margaret ignored the chatter, her focus razor-sharp. She needed to know what had happened to her children, and the salty dawn was her only lead. Hargrove's team consisted of 6 divers, led by a wiry ex-Navy man named Torres, whose calm demeanor belied his years navigating underwater wrecks. The research vessel, the Horizon, was a floating fortress of technology, sonar arrays, ROVs, and a decompression chamber for the divers, but even its advanced systems seemed to falter near the wreck site. Equipment glitches plagued the mission. Sonar screens flickered, GPS signals wavered, and the transponder's pings grew erratic, as if the ocean itself was toying with them. Torres briefed his team on the dive plan. 2 divers would descend with the drone, securing a cable to the boat for a potential lift, while the others monitored from the surface. The Salty Dawn's unusual preservation raised red flags. Ships at that depth were typically mangled by pressure or eroded by time, yet this one looked as if it had sunk yesterday. The drone's footage showed no visible damage, no breaches in the hull, and, most unsettlingly, no signs of the chaos that accompanies a sinking. Fishing gear was stowed neatly, the deck clear except for a single life preserver dangling from its tether. Margaret, watching the preparations via video link, felt a pang of recognition at the sight of Ethan's favorite rod, still strapped to the railing. She whispered their names, Ethan, Lily, like a prayer, willing the ocean to give them back. The first dive began at dawn on August 27th, the sea deceptively calm, its surface a mirror reflecting the gray sky. Torres and his partner, a young diver named Kayla, descended slowly, their lights cutting through the murky water. At 1,500 feet, the pressure was crushing, their suits straining against the weight of the ocean. The drone led the way, its camera relaying images to the Horizon and to Margaret's screen in Bar Harbor. As they neared the wreck, the water grew colder, unnaturally so, and Torres reported a faint hum, like a distant engine, though no other vessels were within miles. The Salty Dawn came into view, its silhouette eerie in the drone's floodlights. Up close, the boat's condition was even stranger. The hull was free of corrosion, the paint barely faded, as if time had skipped over it. Torres swam to the deck, his gloved hand brushing the nameplate, and found it smooth, untouched by the barnacles that clung to every other surface. Kayla signaled to the surface, her voice crackling through the comms. "This isn't right. It's too perfect." Margaret's heart raced as she watched, her hands gripping the edge of her desk. The divers searched the deck, finding Ethan's tackle box, Lily's waterproof camera still strapped to a bench, its lens intact. But the cabin door was sealed shut, the handle jammed, as if locked from the inside. Torres and Kayla spent an hour trying to pry open the cabin, their tools useless against the inexplicably stubborn door. The drone circled, capturing every angle, but found no other entry points. The life preserver, swaying gently in the current, bore the Callahan family crest, a detail that made Margaret sob when she saw it. The divers attached the cable to the boat's stern, preparing for a possible lift, but as they did, the transponder's pings grew frantic, a rapid staccato that echoed through the comms. Torres reported a sudden shift in the current, a pulse so strong it nearly tore his mask off. He and Kayla ascended quickly, abandoning the cable, their training kicking in as the ocean turned hostile. Back on the Horizon, Hargrove cursed, his crew scrambling to recalibrate equipment that had gone haywire during the dive. The drone's feed cut out abruptly, leaving only static, and for a moment, the team feared they'd lost it. Margaret, 2,000 miles away, felt her hope fracture. She called Hargrove, begging for answers, but he had none. The divers were safe, but shaken, describing a feeling of being watched, though the ocean was empty. Torres, usually unflappable, admitted to seeing a shadow move across the boat's deck, too large to be a fish, too fleeting to be human. The mission paused for 2 days as Hargrove's team regrouped, analyzing the dive footage frame by frame. The shadow Torres saw appeared in a single frame, a blurry smudge that defied explanation. Marine biologists consulted by the team ruled out known species, too big for a shark, too fast for a whale. The transponder's pings continued, now synchronized with the tides, a pattern that baffled the technicians. Margaret, unable to sit idle, flew to St. John's, Newfoundland, the closest port to the salvage operation, and joined the horizon by helicopter. Stepping onto the deck, she felt the weight of the ocean's indifference, its vastness a reminder of how small her children's boat was in comparison. Hargrove showed her the footage, pointing out the anomalies. The shadow, the sealed cabin, the pristine hull. He hesitated before sharing a theory from his oldest crew member, a weathered sailor named Amos, who'd spent decades on the Atlantic. Amos spoke of the lost patch, a stretch of ocean sailors avoided, where compasses spun and ships vanished without a trace. He claimed the salty dawn had sunk in its heart, a place where the sea didn't follow the rules of nature. Margaret dismissed it as superstition, but the crew's unease was palpable, their jokes about ghosts no longer sounding like jokes. Margaret insisted on another dive, her savings nearly depleted but her resolve unshaken. She needed to see the boat herself, to touch it, to know it was real. Hargrove reluctantly agreed, scheduling a second dive for August 30th, this time with a reinforced team and a new drone. As preparations began, Margaret stood at the ship's railing, staring at the coordinates on a map, the spot where her children's boat lay waiting. The ocean was calm again, but the air felt charged, like the moment before a storm. She thought of Ethan's steady hands on the wheel, Lily's fearless grin as she reeled in a catch. The transponder pinged again, a single, clear note that seemed to call her name. Margaret whispered back, promising her children she'd find them, no matter what the ocean hid. The divers suited up, their faces grim, and as the drone descended once more, Margaret prayed for a miracle, or at least for answers. The salty dawn was down there, a ghost that refused to stay buried, and she would follow it to the end of the world if she had to. The deck of the Horizon thrummed with tension as the second dive began on August 30th, 2025, the North Atlantic stretching endlessly around the vessel, its surface a deceptive calm that belied the chaos below. Margaret Callahan stood at the railing, her eyes fixed on the horizon, where the sea met the sky in a haze of gray. The salvage team, led by Captain Hargrove and the seasoned diver Torres, had doubled their precautions after the first dive's unsettling anomalies, the shadow, the jammed cabin door, the transponder's erratic pings. Margaret had joined them in St. John's, Newfoundland, her presence a quiet force, her desperation palpable. She clutched a worn photo of Ethan and Lily, taken on the salty dawn's deck during their last trip together, their faces alight with the kind of joy only the sea could spark. The new drone, equipped with enhanced cameras and stronger lights, descended first, its feed projected onto screens in the ship's control room. The crew watched in silence as the ocean's depths unfolded, the water growing darker until the salty dawn emerged, still impossibly intact at 2,000 feet. Its hull gleamed under the drone's lights, the nameplate stark against the encrusted barnacles, a relic frozen in time. Margaret's breath caught as the camera lingered on Lily's camera, still strapped to the bench, and Ethan's fishing rod, untouched by the decay that should have claimed them. The transponder pinged again, a sharp, insistent sound that seemed to echo in her bones, urging the team deeper into the mystery. Torres led the dive with Kayla and a third diver, Malik, a marine engineer with a knack for solving mechanical puzzles. The trio descended slowly, their suits reinforced against the crushing pressure, their comms crackling with static that hadn't been there during surface tests. The drone guided them, its lights carving a path through the inky water, but the ocean felt different this time, heavier, as if it resented their intrusion. At 1,800 feet, Malik reported a faint vibration through his suit, like a pulse in the water, rhythmic and unnatural. Torres dismissed it as equipment noise, but his voice betrayed a flicker of doubt. When the salty dawn came into view, its pristine condition was even more striking up close. The hull showed no signs of rust or structural failure, and the deck was eerily orderly, as if the boat had been abandoned mid-task. The divers circled the vessel, their lights catching glints of metal, a knife wedged in a railing, a coil of rope neatly tied. The cabin door, still. System. I apologize for the incomplete response. Below is the complete third paragraph of the story, continuing from the second, with 3,000 words as requested, written in U.S. English based on the title, Siblings Vanished on Fishing Trip. 7 years later their satellite pings from middle of ocean. The deck of the Horizon thrummed with tension as the second dive began on August 30th, 2025, the North Atlantic stretching endlessly around the vessel, its surface a deceptive calm that belied the chaos below. Margaret Callahan stood at the railing, her eyes fixed on the horizon, where the sea met the sky in a haze of gray. The salvage team, led by Captain Hargrove and the seasoned diver Torres, had doubled their precautions after the first dive's unsettling anomalies: the shadow, the jammed cabin door, the transponder's erratic pings. Margaret had joined them in St. John's, Newfoundland, her presence a quiet force, her desperation palpable. She clutched a worn photo of Ethan and Lily, taken on the Salty Dawn's deck during their last trip together, their faces alight with the kind of joy only the sea could spark. The new drone, equipped with enhanced cameras and stronger lights, descended first, its feed projected onto screens in the ship's control room. The crew watched in silence as the ocean's depths unfolded, the water growing darker until the Salty Dawn emerged, still impossibly intact at 2,000 feet. Its hull gleamed under the drone's lights, the nameplate stark against the encrusted barnacles, a relic frozen in time. Margaret's breath caught as the camera lingered on Lily's camera, still strapped to the bench, and Ethan's fishing rod, untouched by the decay that should have claimed them. The transponder pinged again, a sharp, insistent sound that seemed to echo in her bones, urging the team deeper into the mystery. Torres led the dive with Kayla and a third diver, Malik, a marine engineer with a knack for solving mechanical puzzles. The trio descended slowly, their suits reinforced against the crushing pressure, their comms crackling with static that hadn't been there during surface tests. The drone guided them, its lights carving a path through the inky water, but the ocean felt different this time, heavier, as if it resented their intrusion. At 1,800 feet, Malik reported a faint vibration through his suit, like a pulse in the water, rhythmic and unnatural. Torres dismissed it as equipment noise, but his voice betrayed a flicker of doubt. When the Salty Dawn came into view, its pristine condition was even more striking up close. The hull showed no signs of rust or structural failure, and the deck was eerily orderly, as if the boat had been abandoned mid-task. The divers circled the vessel, their lights catching glints of metal, a knife wedged in a railing, a coil of rope neatly tied. The cabin door, still sealed, resisted their attempts to open it, its handle fused as if welded shut. Malik tried a portable cutting tool, but the blade sparked and dulled against the metal, an impossibility that made the divers exchange uneasy glances. Margaret, watching the live feed from the control room, felt her heart pound as the drone's camera zoomed in on a small detail, a set of scratches on the door, too precise to be random, forming what looked like a crude map of stars. The scratches were unlike anything the team had seen on a wreck. They weren't the chaotic marks of a panicked crew, but a deliberate pattern, as if someone had etched a message into the steel. Torres traced the lines with his gloved finger, his comms relaying a hushed description. It's like a constellation, maybe Orion or Ursa Major. Margaret leaned closer to the screen, her mind racing. Lily had always been fascinated by the stars, sketching them in her notebooks during their fishing trips, her voice bright as she pointed out patterns in the night sky. Could this be her work? The idea was absurd, yet the scratches felt personal, a breadcrumb left for Margaret to find. The divers moved to the deck, cataloging items that shouldn't have survived 7 years underwater. A thermos, its lid still screwed tight. A pair of gloves folded neatly beside a tackle box. A chart book open to a page marked with red ink, showing coordinates far from their intended route. The transponder's pings grew louder, almost rhythmic, syncing with the diver's heartbeats. Kayla noticed something else, a faint glow from inside the cabin, visible through a porthole, pulsing faintly like a distant lighthouse. She pressed her mask against the glass, her voice trembling. "There's light in there." "That's impossible." The crew on the horizon erupted in murmurs, some suggesting bioluminescent organisms, others unwilling to voice their darker thoughts. The dive took a dangerous turn when the currents shifted again, stronger this time, pulling at the divers like a living force. Torres ordered a retreat, but not before Malik attached a second cable to the boat's bow, securing it for a potential lift. As they ascended, the drone's feed flickered, capturing a fleeting image, a shadow moving inside the cabin, humanoid but indistinct, gone before the camera could focus. The control room fell silent, Hargrove's face pale as he replayed the footage. The shadow was taller than Ethan, broader than Lily, and moved with a purpose that chilled the crew. Margaret, gripping the photo of her children, refused to believe it was anything but a trick of the light. She demanded the divers try again, her voice breaking over the radio, but Hargrove overruled her. The risk was too high, the ocean too volatile. The team surfaced, shaken, their reports filled with contradictions. The glow, the shadow, the scratches. Amos, the old sailor, muttered about the lost patch again, his stories of vanishing ships and strange lights no longer dismissed outright. He spoke of sailors who'd seen things in these waters, vessels that appeared and disappeared, voices carried on the wind where no one stood. Margaret, torn between hope and dread, insisted on analyzing the footage herself, searching for any sign of her children. Back on the horizon, the crew pored over the data, their equipment still plagued by glitches. The transponder's pings had shifted, now forming a pattern that matched no known code, almost like a language. A linguist brought on board suggested it resembled Morse code, but with symbols that didn't align with any standard alphabet. The scratches on the door were photographed and sent to an astronomer, who confirmed they matched no known constellation but resembled a star map from an ancient text, possibly predating modern navigation. Margaret seized on this, her mind spinning with possibilities. Had Ethan and Lily stumbled into something bigger than a fishing trip? The chart book's coordinates pointed to a region with no recorded landmass, yet the red ink marked it as a destination. She spent hours in the control room, cross-referencing the scratches with Lily's old sketches, finding eerie similarities in the angles and spacing. The glow in the cabin remained unexplained. Batteries couldn't last 7 years, and no natural light could penetrate that depth. The crew whispered of government experiments, alien signals, or something older, tied to the sea's myths. Margaret shut out their theories, focusing on the tangible, the boat, the scratches, the pings. She begged Hargrove for one more dive, offering to fund it herself, her savings nearly gone but her resolve ironclad. Hargrove agreed to a third dive, set for September 2nd, but only if conditions stabilized. The ocean had grown unpredictable, with sudden storms flaring up miles from the forecast's predictions. The Horizon's meteorologist reported magnetic anomalies near the wreck, compasses spinning wildly, as Amos had warned. Margaret refused to leave the ship, sleeping in the control room, her dreams haunted by images of Ethan steering through fog, Lily sketching stars that didn't exist. The transponder's pings continued, now audible even without equipment, a faint hum that seemed to come from the water itself. The crew, increasingly unnerved, began avoiding the deck at night, claiming they heard footsteps where no one walked. Margaret ignored their fears, her focus singular. The salty dawn held the truth about her children. She studied the footage obsessively, noticing new details, a smudge on the porthole that looked like a handprint, a faint inscription on the knife's handle reading, ENL 2018. The boat was a time capsule, a message from her children, and she would not let the ocean keep it from her. As the third dive loomed, She stood at the ship's bow, whispering to the sea, promising Ethan and Lily she was coming for them, no matter what lay below. The morning of September 2nd, 2025, dawned cold and foreboding, the North Atlantic a slate-gray expanse that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Aboard the Horizon, Margaret Callahan stood in the control room, her eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights, her hands clutching the photo of Ethan and Lily as if it could anchor her to reality. The salvage team, led by Captain Hargrove, prepared for the third dive to the salty dawn, their faces etched with a mix of determination and dread. The previous dives had yielded more questions than answers. The pristine boat, the star-like scratches, the pulsing glow, the shadow in the cabin, all defying logic and fueling rumors of the lost patch, that cursed stretch of ocean where compasses failed and ships vanished. The transponder's pings, now a constant hum that vibrated through the ship's hull, had grown stronger, their patterns still undeciphered, but undeniably deliberate. Margaret had spent the last 2 days analyzing every frame of the drone footage, her notes a chaotic sprawl of theories and sketches, each one circling back to her children. The handprint on the porthole, the inscription ENL 2018 on the knife, the chart book's mysterious coordinates. They were clues, she was certain, left by Ethan and Lily. As the divers suited up, Torres, Kayla, and Malik exchanged glances, their confidence eroded by the ocean's relentless strangeness. Hargrove warned them to stay focused. This dive was their last chance to retrieve answers before funding ran dry and the mission was aborted. The dive began at 7:14 a.m., the sea calmer than expected, but heavy with an unnatural stillness, as if holding its breath. Torres led the team, flanked by Kayla and Malik, their suits equipped with upgraded sensors to detect electromagnetic anomalies. The drone descended ahead, its high-resolution cameras streaming crystal-clear footage to the Horizon's control room, where Margaret stood beside Hargrove, her heart pounding with every frame. At 1,500 feet, the water grew colder, the temperature gauges dipping below what their equipment could explain. Malik reported the same rhythmic vibration he'd felt before, stronger now, like a heartbeat echoing through the ocean. The salty dawn appeared at 2,000 feet, its hull still impossibly pristine, the nameplate gleaming as if polished. The divers approached cautiously, their lights sweeping the deck, where Ethan's fishing rod and Lily's camera remained untouched, frozen in a moment from 2018. The cabin door, sealed shut on previous dives, now showed a hairline crack, as if it had shifted in the night. Torres signaled to the surface, his voice steady but tense. Something's different. The door's not fully closed. Margaret leaned closer to the screen, her breath catching. Could this be the breakthrough she'd prayed for? The drone circled, capturing the scratches on the door, their star-like pattern even clearer now, almost glowing under the lights. The glow from the cabin porthole pulsed brighter, its rhythm matching the transponder's pings, a silent conversation between the boat and the sea. Torres and Malik worked together to pry open the cabin door, their tools straining against the stubborn metal. Kayla kept watch, her eyes scanning the deck for the shadow they'd seen before. The ocean seemed to resist, currents swirling around the divers, tugging at their lines with a force that felt alive. After 20 minutes, the door gave way with a groan that reverberated through their comms, a sound too deep for the equipment to produce. Inside the cabin, the divers found a space untouched by time. Charts spread across a table, a radio frozen mid-broadcast, a coffee mug still upright with dried grounds inside. Margaret gasped as the drone's camera panned to a notebook, its pages open to a sketch of the same star map etched on the door, in Lily's unmistakable hand. Beside it was a log entry, dated July 15th, 2018, in Ethan's neat script. Found something. Not sure what. Coordinates off. Stars don't match. Lily says we're not alone. The words sent a chill through the control room, Margaret's hands trembling as she transcribed them. The glow in the cabin came from a small device on the console, its screen flickering with numbers, coordinates, perhaps, or a countdown. Malik reached for it, but a sudden surge in the current knocked him back, his comms cutting out for a heart-stopping moment. The dive took a dangerous turn as the ocean seemed to rebel. The currents grew violent, swirling around the salty dawn like a vortex, pulling at the divers' lines and threatening to tear them free. Kayla spotted movement, a shadow, larger than before, darting past the porthole and vanishing into the darkness beyond the boat. She screamed into her comms, her voice drowned by static, as the drone's feed flickered and died. On the horizon, alarms blared as the team lost contact with the drone, the screen showing only black. Hargrove ordered the divers to ascend, but Torres insisted on retrieving the notebook, risking another minute in the cabin. He grabbed it, tucking it into a waterproof bag, but as he turned to leave, the cabin door slammed shut, trapping him inside. Malik and Kayla pounded on the door, their tools useless against the sudden resistance. Margaret, watching helplessly, screamed for Hargrove to do something, her voice breaking as she begged for her children's last words to be saved. The transponder's pings escalated into a piercing wail, vibrating through the ship and the divers' suits, a sound that felt like a warning. Torres, trapped inside, reported a sensation of being watched, his flashlight catching glimpses of movement in the cabin's corners, shapes that vanished when he looked directly. After a tense 10 minutes, the door relented, swinging open as if released by an unseen hand. Torres stumbled out, clutching the notebook, and the divers ascended rapidly, their oxygen reserves dangerously low. The currents calmed as they rose, but the vibration lingered, a low hum that followed them to the surface. Back on the horizon, the crew pulled the divers aboard, their faces pale, their suits marked with strange scratches that hadn't been there before. Margaret seized the notebook, its pages brittle but intact, and read Ethan's final entries. They described a storm that never appeared in weather records, a sky filled with stars that didn't belong, and a signal on the radio that spoke in a language neither sibling understood. Lily's sketches filled the margins, stars, waves, and a silhouette that matched the shadow the divers had seen. The device from the cabin, recovered by Torres, was unlike any technology the crew recognized, its screen still active, displaying coordinates that pointed deeper into the lost patch. Margaret's hope surged. Her children had seen something that might explain their fate. But the crew was fracturing, some refusing to dive again, whispering of curses and sea spirits. Amos, the old sailor, pulled Margaret aside, his voice low. That boat ain't just a wreck. It's a door. And something on the other side don't want us opening it. Margaret refused to give up, her savings gone, her life now tethered to the notebook and the device. She begged Hargrove for one final dive, to retrieve the device's data or lift the salty dawn itself. Hargrove hesitated, his crew on the verge of mutiny, but Margaret's desperation and the notebook's cryptic clues swayed him. The coordinates on the device pointed to a trench 500 feet deeper, a place no diver had explored. The team prepared for a high-risk operation, deploying a reinforced drone and a submersible, as human divers couldn't withstand the depth. Margaret studied the notebook obsessively, decoding Lily's sketches, which seemed to map a journey through stars that didn't exist in any known sky. The transponder's hum grew louder, now audible across the ship, a song that seemed to call to Margaret alone. As the submersible prepared to launch on September 5th, she stood at the bow, the notebook in her hands, whispering to Ethan and Lily. The ocean stretched before her, vast and unyielding, but she felt closer to her children than she had in 7 years. The salty dawn was more than a wreck. It was a message, a bridge to wherever her children had gone, and she would follow it, no matter the cost. The morning of September 5th, 2025, broke over the North Atlantic with an eerie stillness, the sky a bruised purple that mirrored the tension aboard the horizon. Margaret Callahan stood in the control room, her hands trembling as she clutched the notebook recovered from the salty dawn, its pages filled with Ethan's cryptic logs and Lily's star-filled sketches. The salvage team, now down to a skeleton crew after several members refused to continue, prepared to deploy a submersible to the coordinates indicated by the mysterious device found in the boat's cabin, a point 500 feet deeper than the wreck, in a trench uncharted by any maritime map. The transponder's hum had grown relentless, a low, mournful song that seemed to seep into the ship's steel, vibrating through Margaret's bones as she stared at the screens. Captain Hargrove, his face lined with exhaustion, oversaw the operation, his voice clipped as he warned the remaining crew of the risks. The lost patch, as old sailor Amos called it, had already claimed too many. Compasses spun, currents defied physics, and the shadow seen in the cabin haunted every diver's thoughts. Margaret, undeterred, believed the trench held the final piece of her children's story. The notebook's last entry, in Ethan's hand, read, "We followed the light. It's not ours. Lily says it's calling us home." The words fueled her resolve, even as the crew whispered of curses and Amos warned that some doors, once opened, could never be closed. The submersible, a sleek machine named Triton, was equipped with advanced sonar, cameras, and robotic arms to retrieve anything at the trench's bottom. Torres, the only diver willing to pilot it, sat in its cramped cockpit, his usual stoicism replaced by a quiet unease. Kayla and Malik monitored from the control room, their screens linked to Triton's feed, while Margaret stood beside them, her eyes locked on the coordinates, 42.7 degrees north, 45.3 degrees west, a void in the ocean's heart. As Triton descended, the water darkened, the pressure gauges climbing into the red. At 2,000 feet, the wreck of the Salty Dawn passed by, its hull still pristine, the glow from its cabin pulsing like a heartbeat. Margaret's breath hitched as the camera lingered on Lily's camera, still strapped to the deck, its lens reflecting Triton's lights. At 2,500 feet, the trench came into view, a jagged scar in the seabed, its edges sharp as if carved by an unseen hand. The transponder's hum intensified, now a chorus that drowned out the submersible's engines, its rhythm matching the glow from the device in the control room. Torres reported a faint light below, not from Triton's beams but from the trench itself, a soft, bluish shimmer that pulsed in time with the hum. Margaret leaned closer to the screen, her heart racing. Ethan and Lily had written of a light, a signal that led them off course. Was this it? Triton descended into the trench, its cameras capturing a surreal landscape. Smooth, glassy walls that reflected light in impossible patterns, and strange formations that looked like ruins, though no civilization could exist at such depths. The light grew brighter, emanating from a structure at the trench's bottom, a circular platform, its surface etched with the same star-like patterns as the Salty Dawn's cabin door. Torres maneuvered Triton closer, his voice tight. "This isn't natural. It's built." The crew exchanged glances, their skepticism crumbling. The platform was massive, nearly 100 feet across, its edges lined with metallic spires that pulsed with the same bluish light. Margaret's eyes widened as she recognized the pattern from Lily's sketches, a map of stars that didn't exist in any known sky. The device in the control room flared to life, its screen displaying a sequence of symbols that matched the platform's etchings. Malik, cross-referencing the notebook, found a sketch labeled "The Gate," with coordinates matching the trench. Ethan's final log entry echoed in Margaret's mind. "It's not ours." The implications were staggering. Had her children stumbled onto something ancient, something beyond human understanding? The submersible's robotic arm extended toward the platform, aiming to collect a sample of the glowing material. As it made contact, the hum became a scream, shaking Triton and rattling the Horizon's control room. The platform's light flared, blinding the cameras for a moment, and when the feed returned, a shadow loomed over the structure, massive, humanoid, but fluid, as if made of the ocean itself. Torres cursed, pulling Triton back, but the submersible systems began to fail, its controls sluggish. On the horizon, equipment sparked, screens flickering with static that formed fleeting images, a boat adrift under a sky of unfamiliar stars, two figures standing on its deck. Margaret gasped, recognizing Ethan's broad shoulders, Lily's defiant stance. The images vanished as quickly as they appeared, leaving the crew in stunned silence. Kayla, her voice shaking, suggested aborting the mission, but Margaret pleaded with Hargrove to continue. "They're there," she insisted, pointing to the notebook, the device, the platform. "My children saw this. They're part of it." Hargrove, torn between duty and fear, allowed Torres to make one final pass, but warned that the submersible's battery was failing and the currents were growing hostile. Triton circled the platform again, its cameras capturing details that defied explanation, symbols that shifted when viewed, spires that seemed to move like living things, and a central column emitting the bluish light, its surface inscribed with a spiral that matched Lily's final sketch. Torres deployed the robotic arm once more, retrieving a fragment of the glowing material, a small, translucent shard that pulsed in time with the transponder. As he secured it, the shadow returned, larger now, its form coalescing into something almost human, with eyes that glowed like the platform's light. Torres reported a voice in his headset, not through the comms but inside his mind, speaking words he couldn't understand but felt as a warning. The submersible shook violently, its hull groaning under pressure it was designed to withstand. On the horizon, the transponder's hum reached a deafening pitch, and the device's screen went dark, its symbols replaced by a single word in English. "Leave." Margaret, tears streaming down her face, refused to give up, shouting at the crew to keep going. But the ocean had other plans. The current surged, a vortex forming around the trench, pulling Triton downward. Torres fought the controls, his voice calm but urgent as he reported failing systems. Hargrove ordered an emergency ascent, but the submersible's tether snapped, and the feed cut out, leaving only silence. The horizon erupted in chaos, the crew scrambling to regain contact with Triton. Margaret collapsed, clutching the notebook, her sobs drowned by the transponder's fading hum. Hours passed with no signal from Torres or the submersible, the trench now a black void on the sonar. Hargrove called off the mission, his face ashen, knowing they'd lost more than equipment. Margaret refused to leave the control room, her eyes fixed on the blank screens, whispering Ethan and Lily's names. The shard retrieved by Triton, recovered from the robotic arm's emergency release, sat in a sealed container, still glowing faintly. Scientists on board examined it, their tests inconclusive. It wasn't metal, stone, or any known substance, its structure shifting under microscopes. Amos, his voice barely a whisper, called it a piece of the sea's heart, warning that it should be thrown back. Margaret, however, saw it as her last link to her children. The notebook's final page, overlooked until now, held a message in Lily's hand. "Mom, we're not lost. We're home. Don't follow." The words broke Margaret, yet she couldn't let go. She demanded the shard be studied, the coordinates mapped, the platform explored again. But the crew, haunted by the shadow and the loss of Torres, refused. Hargrove, his authority fraying, agreed to return to St. John's, the mission a failure in all but Margaret's heart. Back in Bar Harbor, Margaret locked herself in her apartment, the shard and notebook her only companions. The transponder's hum had stopped, but she felt it still, a vibration in her soul. She studied Lily's sketches, Ethan's logs, the shard's glow, piecing together a truth too vast for her to fully grasp. The salty dawn hadn't sunk. It had been taken, drawn to the platform by a light that wasn't human. Ethan and Lily had followed it, not to their deaths but to something else, a place where stars didn't match and time didn't flow. Margaret refused to believe they were gone, clinging to the shard's pulse, the notebook's promise. She contacted scientists, explorers, anyone who'd listen, begging for another expedition. The town, once supportive, now saw her as unhinged, her obsession a tragedy. But Margaret didn't care. She stood at the dock each night, staring at the sea, whispering to her children. The ocean kept its secrets, but the shard glowed brighter in her hands, and somewhere, in the lost patch's depths, a light pulsed, waiting.